Sometimes the brightest smiles hide the deepest cracks. Hudson and Rex looked like a dream show, lighthearted, loyal, and loved by millions. But behind the wagon tail of Rex and the steady gaze of Detective Charlie Hudson, there was a weight that no one wanted to see. And by season 8, that weight was pulling everything down. Especially John Reardon himself. From the very first episode, Hudson and Rex promised audiences something simple yet powerful, a detective and his dog solving crimes together. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trying to shock. Instead, it leaned into the warmth of companionship, the thrill of mystery, and the comfort of routine. Detective Charlie Hudson, played by John Reardon, quickly became the steady anchor of the series. His quiet charm, his professional calm, and his bond with Rex gave viewers a character they could trust week after week. The show's setting in St. John's, Newfoundland, gave it a unique personality. Wide coastal shots, small-town warmth, and a sense of place that made the stories feel both local and universal. It wasn't a big-city drama filled with explosions and chaos. It was a reminder that crime shows could also have heart. Audiences loved that. It felt fresh, even though crime dramas are one of the most overdone genres in television. And then, of course, there was Rex, more than just a dog. Rex became a symbol. Loyal, brave, and sometimes smarter than the humans around him. Rex wasn't just Charlie Hudson's partner, he was the emotional heart of the show. Every case wasn't just about catching the bad guy, but about how man and dog could overcome anything together. Viewers formed an attachment to Rex the way people form attachments to long-running TV families. He wasn't just a character. He was a companion you could count on. For John Reardon, Hudson and Rex looked like the role of a lifetime. He wasn't just an actor on a show, he was the face of the franchise. His image was on the posters, his character led the stories, and his chemistry with Rex carried the emotional weight of the entire production. For 7 seasons, he held that responsibility with calm professionalism. He didn't play Hudson as a flashy detective. He played him as a real man, a man who solved problems with patience, intelligence, and a quiet sense of duty. That made him relatable, even comforting. Fans came to expect consistency, and Reardon gave it to them. The show grew its loyal audience not through shocking cliffhangers or wild story arcs, but through the steady rhythm of trust. You knew what you were getting every week. A case, a puzzle, a few laughs, a few heartfelt moments, and the reliable bond of Hudson and Rex, and for many people, that predictability became a form of comfort television. It was something you could turn on after a long day, something safe, something familiar. But here's the problem. Comfort can become a trap. What feels stable can quickly feel stagnant. And for an actor like John Reardon, carrying the weight of that stability year after year, cracks were bound to appear. Fans didn't see them at first. They only saw the smile, the bond with Rex, and the warm glow of a show that promised nothing more than light-hearted crime-solving. But behind that perfect surface, a different story was waiting to be told. A story that would reach its breaking point in season 8. Every television show has 2 sides. The one we see on screen, polished and glowing, and the one we never see, hidden behind cameras, scripts, and long days of production. Hudson and Rex looked effortless, as if each episode was simply the natural extension of John Reardon's easy charm and Rex's loyal performance. But reality is never that simple. What the audience didn't see were the cracks forming in the foundations of the show, the kind of cracks that don't appear suddenly, but grow quietly, season by season, until they're impossible to ignore. The truth is, television is a machine. Once a show finds success, the machine demands more episodes, more seasons, more content to keep viewers hooked. For a show like Hudson and Rex, that meant year after year of filming long hours in Newfoundland, often in difficult weather with very little time for rest between seasons. The cast and crew became used to a relentless cycle: shoot, wrap, edit, promote, and then start all over again. It sounds glamorous on the outside, but it's draining on the inside. For John Reardon, the pressure was doubled. As the face of the series, he carried not just the performance, but the brand. He was Charlie Hudson in every interview, every press release, every fan event. Playing the same role for so many years can feel like wearing the same suit every single day you begin to forget where the role ends and the real person begins. Reardon was praised for his consistency, but consistency can be a cage. It leaves little room for growth, little room for risk, little room for the kind of creative freedom actors crave. Then there's the writing. By the time a show enters its 7th or 8th season, the risk of creative fatigue is high. How many times can a detective solve a case of the week without it feeling repetitive? How many new dynamics can be invented between a man and his dog before it feels like a recycled loop? Fans started to notice recycled plot lines, familiar tropes, and episodes that felt less inspired than the early seasons. For an actor like Reardon, who had to deliver those lines with the same passion as if it were brand new, the toll was invisible but heavy. Behind the scenes, there were whispers about scripts being rushed, about pressure from networks to keep the formula the same, about production timelines that allowed little space for experimentation. And when a show refuses to evolve, the ones who suffer most are often the performers. Reardon may have smiled on camera, but the strain of carrying the same role under the same demands, with little room for creative breathing space, was growing heavier with each season. Fans, of course, rarely see this side of the story. They see the final cut, not the late-night rewrites, the exhausting press tours, or the endless retakes in freezing rain. They don't see the moments when an actor wants to take their character in a new direction but is told, "No, the audience expects this. Stay in the box." For John Reardon, Charlie Hudson wasn't just a character, it became a responsibility. One that slowly turned from rewarding to suffocating, and here's where the tension really built. On the surface, Hudson and Rex still looked stable. Ratings were steady, fans were loyal, and the formula seemed to work. But beneath that stability was a kind of creative erosion, a slow decay that only those close to the production could sense. Reardon, the man who brought Hudson to life, was at the center of it all, smiling for the cameras while quietly carrying the weight of a role that no longer felt as fulfilling as it once did. By the time Season 8 rolled around, the cracks behind the scenes were no longer just whispers. They were showing in the writing, in the energy of the performances, and in the eyes of John Reardon himself. What began as a dream role was starting to feel like a trap, and the cost of holding everything together, of being the unshakable face of a show that refused to change, was about to show itself in ways that fans could no longer ignore. Season 8 was supposed to be just another chapter in the steady rhythm of Hudson and Rex. The formula was familiar: a crime to solve, Charlie's calm intelligence, Rex's clever instincts, and a neat resolution by the end of the hour. But something was different this time. What once felt like routine comfort began to feel like creative exhaustion, and for John Reardon, Season 8 became less about acting and more about surviving. From the very first episodes, longtime fans noticed a change. The spark that made Charlie Hudson such a warm, grounded character seemed to dim. His expressions were flatter, his voice carried less energy, and his once subtle charm looked more like quiet fatigue. Some viewers wrote it off as Hudson being Hudson, a calm detective who never let emotions run wild. But for others, it was impossible to ignore. Reardon wasn't just acting tired. He looked genuinely worn down. And then came the writing. By Season 8, the storylines had grown painfully predictable. The mysteries felt like copies of earlier cases, repackaged with new names and new settings. The once fresh bond between Hudson and Rex now leaned heavily on repetitive gags and exaggerated moments, as if the writers themselves were struggling to find something new to say. Instead of growing with the characters, the show circled back on itself, looping endlessly in safe, recycled patterns. For an actor tasked with making these stories believable, that stagnation was suffocating. Reardon's performance reflected that struggle. You could see it in the smallest details, the way he delivered lines as if weighed down by their familiarity, the way his eyes lacked the spark of curiosity that defined Hudson in earlier seasons. Even in emotional scenes, there was a distance, a sense that the man behind the character was running on empty. It wasn't bad acting, it was something more human. It was the performance of someone who had given too much for too long, someone whose love for the role had been drained by endless repetition and the weight of expectation. Fans began to talk. Social media lit up with comments. What's going on with John Reardon? Some defended him, saying the scripts gave him nothing to work with. Others criticized the show for pushing on without evolving. A few even suggested that the actor himself was burned out, trapped in a role that no longer challenged him. The show, once celebrated for its warmth, was now under a cloud of doubt, with audiences questioning whether it had lost its magic, and maybe that's the cruelest part. When a show drags on too long, it isn't just the story that suffers, it's the people inside it. Season 8 turned what was once a beloved partnership into a burden. Charlie Hudson, the character who had been written as loyal, steady, and dependable, became a mirror of the actor who played him, loyal to the role, steady in his duty, but carrying a silent exhaustion that could no longer be hidden. There were episodes where Reardon's detachment was so visible that fans speculated he might leave the show entirely. Each scene felt heavier, as though he was dragging himself through it. The chemistry with Rex, once effortless and heartwarming, felt rehearsed, more staged than organic. The show that once celebrated the bond between man and dog now looked like a machine running on fumes, with its lead actor visibly strained at the center. Season 8 wasn't just another season. It was the breaking point. It showed the cost of keeping a show alive when the soul behind it was running dry. John Reardon didn't collapse in front of the cameras, but the cracks in his performance revealed everything. The weight of 8 seasons, the exhaustion of carrying a show that refused to change, and the quiet breaking of an actor who had given more than the audience ever realized. By the time the credits rolled on Season 8, the truth was clear. Hudson and Rex was no longer just a story about solving crimes. It had become a story about endurance, about pushing through fatigue, and about the silent breaking of the man who carried it all on his shoulders. John Reardon wasn't just acting anymore, he was enduring. And the audience could feel it. When Season 8 ended, something felt different. Not just for the fans who had followed every case and every tender moment between Hudson and Rex, but for John Reardon himself. The season had pulled back the curtain, exposing the limits of both the show and its leading man. For years, Reardon had been praised as the quiet force holding Hudson and Rex together. But by the end of Season 8, it became clear that he was also the one paying the highest price. The aftermath of Season 8 was a mixture of loyalty and disappointment. Many fans continued to defend the show, arguing that every long-running series has weaker seasons. They wanted to believe that Hudson and Rex could bounce back, that it could return to the lighthearted charm that defined its early days. Others, however, saw Season 8 as proof that the show had stretched itself too far. They pointed to Reardon's visible fatigue as evidence that the series had lost touch with its heart. For Reardon, the legacy of Hudson and Rex is complicated. On one hand, it cemented him as a household name in Canadian television, a dependable actor who carried a franchise for nearly a decade. His bond with Rex became iconic and, for many viewers, inseparable from their idea of the character. On the other hand, the cracks that showed in Season 8 also became part of that legacy. People no longer just remember the steady, charming detective, they also remember the actor who seemed weighed down. The man behind the smile who looked like he was struggling to hold everything together. This duality raises a bigger question about television itself. How long should a show run before it begins to eat away at its own soul? Audiences often demand more seasons, more episodes, more content, but rarely consider what that demand costs the people involved. John Reardon gave his all for Hudson and Rex, but by Season 8 it was clear that the cost was too high. He didn't explode in a dramatic exit or lash out publicly. Instead, his struggle was quieter, more human. It showed in his eyes, in his tone, in the small ways his performance revealed the exhaustion of carrying a role long past its natural life. And yet, there's something almost poetic in that. Charlie Hudson, the character, was written as someone dependable, someone who never walked away from his duty, no matter how heavy it became. In the end, John Reardon mirrored that same loyalty. He stayed, he endured, and he delivered, even when the role was draining him. That quiet endurance may have broken him in Season 8, but it also left a legacy of dedication that fans will never forget. The show itself continues to exist in two different memories. For some, Hudson and Rex will always be the cozy, reliable drama they could turn to when the world felt overwhelming. For others, Season 8 will stand as a cautionary tale about what happens when a show refuses to evolve, when an actor is asked to carry too much for too long. Both of those legacies are true, and both are inseparable from John Reardon's name. The darker side of Hudson and Rex is not about scandal, or controversy, or shocking revelations. It's about something far quieter, far more universal, the human cost of endless success. It's about how even the most beloved roles can become prisons, and how even the strongest actors can be worn down by the weight of expectation. Season 8 didn't just break John Reardon, it revealed the hidden fragility beneath the surface of a show built on loyalty and trust, and maybe that's the real legacy. Hudson and Rex gave us comfort, but it also gave us a reminder. Behind every easy smile, behind every loyal performance, behind every episode that feels safe and familiar, there's a human being carrying the weight. And sometimes that weight becomes too much. So the question remains, was Season 8 just a stumble? Or was it the moment that showed us the truth? That even in the happiest shows, even in the most loyal partnerships, there's always a darker side.